Welcome to Slow Reliability, the show where we learn about SRE and observability 1 week at a time. I'm your host, Stephen Townsend. Welcome back to Slow Reliability. I'm Stephen Townsend, and this is the show where we learn about SRE and observability approximately once every 4,000 years, or more like every 3 or 4 weeks at the moment. Today, I'm here with Dom Finn. Dom, who are you and what are you doing on my podcast?
G'day, Stephen. It's good to be here. So I am a SRE tech lead for an organisation within the regulated industries of Australia. I've been an SRE for 5 years, I think, now. So yeah, it's good to be here and talk the talk.
Today, we're going to be talking about everyone's favourite topic, SLOs. And I never even thought of this until you mentioned this, Dom, which is everyone talks about establishing SLOs. Nobody talks about evolving them and maintaining them over time. So that's really interesting to me. And I was just thinking about it this afternoon, because it's afternoon in New Zealand, I'm in the future, that my instinct is that you establish some SLOs and then you set up a quarterly review of SLOs and then look at the data and see how it's tracking and talk to the business. That's the most that I could, because I've never done it. So how has it worked for you in the real world doing SLOs and evolving them?
I think it's going to be very SLO dependent in terms of the quality of conversations that you have at review time. So I think it's probably up to the organization to decide when is a good time to review an SLO. Anywhere like 60 days, 90 days, wherever you can land on that is a good starting point. But the important thing is to have a cadence. They're not a set and forget thing. I think if you're an organization early adopting SLOs, those first review meetings are kind of going to be difficult because you'll have to reflect on how you reasoned the original values and problems that those SLOs solved. And maybe that's when you were more immature than you are now. So it's good to get to those first few meetings and reflect on maybe the trains of thought we had that led you to decide what those SLOs should be.
What kind of information would you look at as you assess SLOs?
There's sort of a few different lenses that you want to, I guess, look at the SLO through. One would be the targets we've set. Are we consistently meeting them? Have we had to do any specific reliability-based work to recover error budget and move us back into a green operational state? How much has that impacted us? There's sort of that lens which reflects sort of the operational burden of what you've set as a target. On the flip side, you also need to reassess the targets of the SLO against what the business is trying to achieve for that specific capability that you're monitoring and measuring reliability for. And that's can be really complex, I think.
I mean, how would you even have that conversation with someone to say, hey, let's just pick availability. Maybe we're 99.99% available. Turns out that that's much more than we need, and we're probably over-investing in the reliability of this particular service. Maybe we should drop it down to 99% because it's absolutely fine, because maybe something's changed. Have you ever had a situation like that where you say drop the expectation or the thresholds around a particular objective?
I haven't had a particular experience where we've dropped a target. I think a better way to dive into this topic, though, is around latency as a reliability target. So as an SRE in the roles I've worked in, we work closely with product owners who they're maybe not going to talk in terms of milliseconds how fast their service needs to be. And how do you reason a move from 300 milliseconds latency to 200? Those are the difficult conversations to have really reasonably, where both parties come out confident in understanding what they're trying to project as an outcome. One of the ideas that I've been driving in this space recently is latency classes, was the term I was looking for. And so the conversation now turns from, well, our SLO is at 300 milliseconds latency and we're meeting that. Does it need to be faster? Can we make it 200 milliseconds? It goes from that into maybe we have a near real-time experience do we need to make it a real-time experience? And what's the cost to get there in terms of implementation and operability? And that's where the conversations are heading now in terms of SRE's role. So that's a much more meaningful conversation to a product owner, I think.
That makes so much more sense to me. As a tech person, I don't know. I don't think I could calculate mathematically the impact of 200 versus 300 milliseconds. And a business person certainly isn't going to know that either. But when you start to talk about it in those words, near real time, and other classes, that makes so much sense. Very sensible.
Yeah, it's kind of like it was a little bit of a light bulb. And then from there, you can go into sort of after that real time, near real time, or even before real time, doing some research into this space. There's another class called direct causation. And so that's less than like 100 milliseconds. Like you are in control of the universe. That's like real time gaming latencies. So if you go apply that to a regulated industries, I guess SRE role where you're maybe interacting with mobile apps and managing personal data, those those latencies can really help reinforce or actually impact your trust in the organization, I think. So like things you expect to be real time, what we're trying to do at the moment where I'm working is give that a millisecond range. It needs to be between these bands of milliseconds. And so, so then the conversations can progress all the way through down to, maybe there's class 5, which is more batching or overnight latency, where the user expects it'll be done next day. I'll check in tomorrow. But it's all about building those standards internally to have those good conversations.
I was going to suggest that you could potentially tackle it through experimentation, but I sort of talked myself out of it in my head, because let's say you've got a 200 millisecond service and you're wondering what would be the business impact, or how would customer behavior change if we reduce it to 200 milliseconds. You kind of can't achieve that without actually implementing the performance improvements. So I don't know how you'd quite experiment with that, but I guess there's some situations where you could do something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's an untapped area. Well, I assume it's untapped, is the introduction of user analytics into SLO reviews or conversation reviews. I haven't done it yet. It's an area I would like to explore. But if someone is sitting there studying user experience as a science and says like, no, you actually need stuff to finish in 700 milliseconds before a user loses their train of thought and looks elsewhere. Like maybe that's the key parameter, rather than boxing things into like orders of magnitude at 100 milliseconds a second, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, sort of things like that.
That makes a lot of sense. It's so much more complex than I think we credit it for. The whole situation of setting numbers and thresholds in a meaningful way that actually has meaning and context to the business and the customer. I think I've been involved in situations in the past where we've literally plucked numbers out of thin air because there was nothing else to do, and they become the objective or the requirement.
And I think just to emphasize that process is like, that is adoption of SLOs. Like that, who else how do you start better than that? if you know what I mean, like you can't expect all these things to magically happen and people have all this context to go, yes, I've been waiting for this exact capability and I want it at 200 milliseconds. You're not going to get that.
In a way, the establishing of the SLO, the value of that in a way is that you're getting people to think about latency and availability and other aspects of reliability, which is fantastic. And you're starting to measure it. And then when it comes to the evolution of the SLO, that's a different kind of value. That's now we're kind of informed about whether this is meeting the needs of our business and our customers, and whether we need to change our objective or we need to change the reliability of our service in some way.
Yeah, I agree 100%. It is like an evolution. So now we have SLOs. Now we need to figure out how to better describe them in our business context. So there's one more thing I wanted to mention in that space, because there's actually been some cool research. I think this was from the 70s, but going back to like the latency classes, things like above 5 seconds but below 10 seconds is like, if you can get a user to agree and understand that processing will be done in that time, then they're psychologically linked into a conversation and their capacity for annoyance with quality is increased. I thought that was such a cool finding from the research that's being done and the way it's described in terms of like the psychological experience.
So are you saying that if a user knows in advance how long to expect it will take, then they're much more tolerant of slower times?
So if you talk about the use of waiting or loading screens or pending in progress screens on any type of application that a user is interacting with, then that sends the psychological cue to like, all right, there's work being done in some systems. I should wait a little bit. I have my capacity for annoyance has increased based on that interaction. Whereas if you just sort of sit with a frozen screen, the user's like tapping at it. What's going on? Where, like, what's happening? Is it moving? Have I done something wrong? Like, you remove the ability for the user to have questions of the experience rather than put them in it.
So I have just a question. Just want to pick your brain. I'm involved in defining non-functional requirements, which to me has a loose relationship with SLOs in a way. And as part of that, traditionally in the organization, we've had NFRs. Some of them were like SLOs in that there was a threshold. It could be about latency or availability or whatever it is. But there's also requirements which are like, we have to meet these accessibility standards, or we have to have implemented this kind of observability. You know what I mean? Like, and we've just come across to this realization that those kind of things might not be NFRs at all. We're kind of thinking these are just technical requirements. From your view, in the world of SLOs, what is an NFR and what isn't an NFR, and is there still a place for them?
I think NFR is still relevant in terms of your like traditional architecture functions where we are talking functional requirements and non-functional requirements. We can use the non-functional requirements, I think, to build more concrete SLOs and or build like reason the system design of something to meet that non-functional requirement. So the statements, depending on who's made them, they can be similar to an SLO statement. So user must be able to perform function within 500 milliseconds. It's kind of an SLO.
But I think maybe the difference is that an NFR should be a requirement. So I've had to make a call, and because I'm actually running NFRs here, I've said, I think our requirements should be, if we exceed this NFR, then we shouldn't like go live with the next release. Whereas an SLO, I think, should be an objective, and you can break it as long as you're aware of that and make informed decisions about what you want to do next with that. That's kind of like, I had to make a call, and that's kind of the way I'm putting it. Because I don't want to set objectives, because currently we've got this whole sign-off process, and if the NFRs aren't met, then we won't go live. So we can't be too ambitious. It's a different kind of threshold, if that makes sense.
Right. So it's kind of like, but how often do they change would be my question then. Like, are they a dynamic gate that is like a path to improvement, or?
Traditionally, everywhere I've worked in my career, they are static. So you'll define NFRs at the beginning of when a new product or service is released, and they'll probably never change.
So it's a baseline we can't be worse than this sort of thing.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, I mean, SLOs are obviously a different tool, but in terms of a non-functional requirement, the descriptors are quite similar. What either SLOs or NFRs, I think, allow you to do is reason the system design to meet those requirements. With the goal being is you don't want to build an inherently incapable system where you then set a target after you've built it and you go, oh, that system can't actually achieve that. What did we spend all that money on? To me, that's kind of the lever an SRE has in that space when dealing with NFRs.
I've been also trying to leverage NFRs as a way to codify standards of engineering, which I think are required to succeed in this big complex program of work. And now that we've gone through this process, I don't think NFRs are necessarily the right place to put them. It might be more like a definition of done or operational readiness, but it's basic stuff around the level of testing and test automation, observability, making sure that basic information is being tracked, and change management. Things that we need consistency across this big solution, which is made up of many components owned by different teams, so that we can get that centralized view. Yeah, so I'm trying to find a way to codify that, because it's all very well saying, here's a strategy, and then no one will do anything. So how can I make it formalized?
So the question I would have would be, do these processes exist in even a bespoke fashion now within the problem you're trying to solve?
At the moment, there's a fairly federated model. So each team who owns a different part of the solution has their own process, level of maturity, then it's not cohesive. There's no one standard for all. So that's what I'm trying to introduce is I don't want to be heavy-handed, but I want to say as a bare minimum, if you can provide this to me as the environment manager, then that can enable me to provide you all these other benefits.
There's sort of two sides to that coin. There's the technical, I guess, baseline you're trying to achieve, but I think there's also the carrot and the stick for the teams that have to implement and maintain them. Yeah. So like,
yeah,
as a developer, what do I get out of meeting your baseline requirements?
I thought of one example, which is if you do zero downtime deployments, you can deploy whenever you want into a big shared integrated testing environments. If you don't, then you can only deploy outside of business hours, kind of thing.
And that's great. Carrot. I think, yeah, and I think those are the kind of the things you also need to set up in terms of like, here's our baseline requirements. In terms of automating them, that's going to be implementation dependent, but to get support and buy-in for those kind of things, I think, yeah, you need to really highlight what carrot people get out of doing it. And the carrot for you is maybe a more reliable system and a more foundationally stronger system that you've built based on people adhering to these requirements. But they might see something else like, yeah, the ability to deploy whenever they want. What you've described there to me sounds like really like a checklist for production readiness. So here's the baseline requirements that every system or service needs to head into production and be operated for public consumption.
Yeah, and that is one of the avenues we're taking. I'm collaborating with others to define our operational readiness playbook, I guess. But I also want to make sure that if it's in there, that we're doing it during delivery too. We're not just waiting until this thing goes live whenever it goes live for the first time.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's got to be, it's got to shift left. Otherwise, you don't want to be like a nasty gatekeeper at the end of everyone's work going, nah, you didn't tick this box, you didn't do it. So it needs to be a lot of social credit to be able to do that.
On a completely different topic, what are you working on at the moment? Like, what are you trying to achieve in the next, say, 3 to 6 months?
What we're focusing into, so just to revise where I'm at, I'm a SRE tech lead. So I'm within a domain, within a regulated industry or organization within a regulated industry. And so within our domain, we're pivoting to, we've done a lot of building and now we really want to get efficient and scale out as fast as we can. So we're pivoting into, well, I guess there's a few lines of work that we're sort of thinking about. It's like, is our house clean from an SRE perspective? So like, are all our nuts and bolts in place? Do we trust our disaster recovery? Do we trust our backup or database backup and restore capabilities? Yeah, is everything in order that in 6 to 12 months, if stuff does blow up, because we should be working on capacity, if things blow up that are these foundationals, then that's just going to eat our time. That's going to become toil when we don't need it the most. So we're really looking at how do we set the foundations really concretely so we can move on to our bigger goal, which will be around really capacity management and cost. So how do we, I guess the mantra that we're sort of developing is cost-effective reliability. So let's not spend all our money. Let's figure out how reliable we need to be and really pin that back to cost with enough headroom to manage our capacity. So it's going to be like a very interesting juggling act in terms of different numbers what we're trying to achieve and they're within the domain. So an SLO versus the amount of headroom we need to hold in capacity versus the monetary requirements for it to do it.
Honestly, my heart sort of skips a beat just thinking of how complicated it is to actually get cause and effect when you start talking about SLOs and the value of reliability. Is that the kind of the area you're talking about?
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of experimenting, I think. So again, cost-effective reliability. So what are we trying to achieve? How much should it cost? And how much does it cost with capacity planning involved as well? So we obviously don't want to hit a ceiling. We want to be able to scale out. But how far in the future do we look? What do the numbers look like? So it's really turning into an optimization exercise as well. So where can we cut costs without sacrificing reliability. That's going to be like a really interesting thing to go reason and test, like a lot of performance and volume testing, and like, yeah, prove that we can maybe sacrifice A without sacrificing B and save a lot of money, sort of thing.
That's fun. That sounds exciting. I like that.
Yeah,
The level of experimentation.
It's going to be interesting. So yeah, that's going to be a big focus over the next, I guess, 6 to 12 months.
How long has SRE been a thing in your organization?
Within the current organization, what year are we in? 2024. About 5 years.
Ah.
So
I've spoken to guests in the past who've talked about the need to establish an SRE platform, I guess, a set of software which handles things like the collection and calculation and reporting of SLOs. Do you have something like that, or do you just leverage tools which you've purchased?
We wanted the capability to show the organization how reliable we are being as a whole. So we have a service that we use that lists all our SLOs, and they're related to business functions. So we have an SLO representation of business functions, and how reliable those business functions are being. So in a regulated industry, that lets us have really good conversations about risk, which is ultimately where we're trying to get SLOs, is let's get them involved in risks and how we decide or make decisions about risks within the organization.
All right, I'm going to put you on the spot now. Before we close off for this episode, have you got any words of wisdom for anyone out there who's beginning their SRE journey or is struggling to maybe adopt SLOs or evolve them, as the case may be?
I'll go on a little bit of a tangent here. I like to read books that are well beyond my comprehension. I read a book called The Beginning of Infinity by David Deutch, who's a physicist. And he quoted a scientist or another physicist in there saying, I think it was in this book, but anyway, the saying was, if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And that kind of went off in my head a little bit. And I think it's so applicable in the SRE role where you're dealing with socio-technical problems or pursuits. So like really understanding a problem, whether it's a way something is implemented in code, or maybe what that person was thinking when they were implementing it. But the more you change your way of thinking, the more perspectives you can hold in your own head, which is a cognitive exercise, the better the picture you have. So I think it's such a good, I guess, little mantra. If I'm stuck on a problem in particular, maybe I'm thinking about it the wrong way. And so that's like, you can imagine and wield any perspective you can come up with. And the problem you look at might change and give you a way into it. So I guess that's a bit of advice I would have is read books that are too hard for you and you'll think of other stuff.
I can totally see that. Yeah, sometimes it's just a matter of going out and spending time socializing with people who aren't in technology, and I'll come back with a fresh perspective for something completely, a conversation about something completely different. Or I do read books as well, and podcasts as well, conference talks, just ways you can inject new ideas which might completely change the way that you're looking at a problem.
Yeah, exactly. There's resources everywhere. And I think depending on what kind of mind you have, an SRE mind might be looking for things all the time to drag in and apply subconsciously. So whatever medium you're reading or watching or listening to, it's like your brain should be always just listening for stuff it can draw in on.
Just speaking of books, just while we're here, I just wanted to give a shout out to a book called Turn the Ship Around. It's about a nuclear submarine in the US Navy and how they implemented a sort of leadership model versus leader follower. And it was a big, difficult change, but it completely unlocked the sort of potential of all the people on board that submarine. And it's just a really, really applicable to anyone who works in big enterprise. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. That changed my perspective for sure.
That sounds interesting in terms of maybe the cost of coordination for something like that.
And that was a big part. That was a big part of the story, right? Is that if you have leader, well, you've got the captain who's in charge of everything. You are essentially using one person's brain to control this massive, complex system, and all the people below were using very small parts of their brain. So how do you invert that model so that everyone is using all of their brain all the time? That's hard.
Maybe I need to read that book. That sounds interesting.
Good.
Yeah.
All right, thank you so much for coming on the show, Dom. This has been one of my favorite chats in a while. Hope you had fun too.
I did. I love talking this stuff, so it's been great. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for tuning in to Slight Reliability once again, and I will see you shortly because I have another interview lined up next week. See you later.